Let's get right into it. Today, we're unpacking a really profound theological list from Islamic tradition. We're talking about the 7 Muslims forbidden from paradise. Individuals who, according to the texts, won't enter it or even smell its fragrance. In this explainer, we'll dive into these strict prophetic boundaries, see how they collide with modern-day distractions, and most importantly, look at how someone can navigate their way back to spiritual guidance.
Here's a quick roadmap of where we're heading. We'll start by defining those red lines set by prophetic warnings. Then look at the ripple effects of sins that tear apart families and society. After that, we'll cover the heavy toll of despair and cutting off family, before shifting gears to modern misguidance, things like astrology and gambling. Finally, we'll contrast all that with true celestial guidance and open up the doors of repentance.
All right, let's kick things off with our first section, defining those core boundaries and prophetic warnings.
To really understand this, we have to look straight at the explicit warnings. There's a well-known direct translation of a hadith that says 3 types of people God has forbidden from paradise, and the dayuth, who permits corruption in his family. The warning here is absolute. It sets a very severe theological consequence right out of the gate for this specific category of people.
Now you're probably wondering, what exactly is al-dayuth? Well, the sources define it as a man who is completely devoid of protective, righteous jealousy over his family. We're talking about someone who just ignores or even actively permits immodesty and corruption happening right under his own roof. The penalty is so severe because he's totally abandoning his responsibility as a guardian. He's letting those core ethical boundaries be breached at home.
So how does this spill over? That brings us to Section 2, destroying the family and society and the ripple effects of these sins.
And that leads us to the second category, kasiyat ariyat. This refers to women who wear clothes that completely miss the mark on modesty. The texts describe it as appearing covered but practically being naked, with the direct intention of drawing attention. The sources highlight this as a strict warning against deliberately inciting temptation. It's essentially mocking the wisdom behind concealment, and as you can imagine, that has a massive negative ripple effect on overall societal norms.
The third category zooms in on the sanctity of the family unit itself, specifically targeting the unjustified demand for divorce. This means breaking that sacred marital bond without any legitimate, scriptural reason. We're not talking about situations involving real harm, abuse, or neglect. Those are valid. We're talking about acting purely on impulse or fleeting whims. Tearing a family apart just because you feel like it is considered a major transgression because of the sheer destruction it leaves behind.
Then we have the 5th category, which applies to the treacherous ruler or shepherd. And listen, this isn't just about kings, presidents, or politicians. It applies to managers who embezzle or any guardian who puts their own personal gain ahead of the trust they were handed. It's a very clear warning that leadership at absolutely any level is a profound trust. It is not a privilege for you to exploit.
Moving right along to Section 3, let's talk about the heavy consequences of despair and severing the ties of kinship.
The 4th category on this list is incredibly serious. It strictly forbids taking one's own life. The theological texts teach that the human soul is a divine trust. So ending it out of despair or maybe extreme financial pressure actually accelerates a person towards severe punishment in the afterlife. Why? Because it represents a total loss of hope in divine mercy and a complete rejection of life's tests.
Bringing it back to the immediate family, the 6th category is al-aq li-walidayh. This is someone who disobeys, harms, or abandons their parents, especially when they need them the most. Think about it. The sources emphasize that alienating the very people who brought you into this world essentially slams shut one of the greatest, most accessible doors to paradise.
Which brings us to the 7th and final category in this group, the severer of family ties. There's this incredibly powerful quote that says, "The tide of kinship is suspended to the throne, saying, 'He who keeps my ties, God will keep his ties. He who severs my ties, God will sever his ties.'" That is heavy. It shows that God actually cuts off those who refuse to maintain their blood relations, even if there's conflict or past grievances.
Okay, let's pivot a bit to Section 4. How does this look today? Let's dive into misguidance, astrology, and worldly gambles.
How do we see these spiritual distractions play out in our everyday lives? Well, take a look at these odds from a horse race. You see horses like Camara de Hughes and Inner Success. This is a very tangible, modern example of gambling. It's a worldly distraction that completely shifts human reliance away from divine providence and honest hard work and just dumps it all into blind chance and risky, quick games.
We also see this misguidance when people look up at the sky. There is a huge critical difference between astronomy, which is the factual scientific study of stars and planets, and astrology. Astrology is all about fortune-telling and horoscopes, and it is widely rejected by Islamic theology. It's the definition of spiritual misguidance, where people try to pull future knowledge from the stars instead of just trusting in God's ultimate plan.
So let's clear that up in Section 5, looking at the stars of the sky as real guidance, not charlatanry.
The astrological myth tells us that 12 zodiac signs dictate our destiny, right? But the actual scientific reality? The sun passes through 13 constellations. Our sources point out that astrologers literally ignore the 13th constellation, Ophiuchus, just to avoid the unlucky number 13. I mean, that alone proves their whole zodiac system is built on arbitrary human superstitions, not actual facts from the cosmos.
So what is the real purpose of the stars? Well, according to navigational science and our source material, there are exactly 62 visible navigational stars. They weren't put there to tell you if you're going to have a good Tuesday. They were created to help travelers literally find their way through the pitch-black darkness of land and sea. They are incredibly practical tools for physical guidance that show off the order of the universe.
Now, you might be asking yourself a pretty big question right about now. If astrology, gambling, and these 7 major sins are the absolute red lines, how do you course correct? When you realize you've lost your spiritual way, how do you actually navigate your way back to the path of paradise?
That brings us to our final and most hopeful section, the doors of repentance and righteous deeds.
Overcoming these forbidden states is definitely not impossible, but it does require a structured return. It's basically a 3-step process. First, sincere repentance, known as al-tawbiyah. Second, you have to immediately stop the harmful behavior. And third, you have to actively replace that bad behavior with undeniable good, getting out there and engaging in righteous, charitable deeds.
And to put those righteous deeds into a modern perspective, just look at this number, 8.2 million. The sources highlight that the UAE distributed 8.2 million meals to the needy during Ramadan. That is a massive, tangible act of charity. It's exactly the kind of concrete, positive action that helps pave the way toward paradise, overriding past mistakes through monumental good.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Navigating the crazy complexities of life really comes down to choosing the right compass. Are you going to let worldly illusions, fake stars, and temporary desires chart your course, or will you anchor your life to the rigorous, meaningful principles that actually guarantee your ultimate destination? The choice of how you navigate is entirely up to you.